there are two problems: the problem of natural evil, or the problem of pain, the problem of moral evil. And what strikes me as fascinating is that when we look at the book of Job, which Rabbi Elliott mentioned, we find that the sources of his problems are both of those things. They are two murderous raids by Sabaeans and Chaldeans on his family, that's moral evil, and there are two natural disasters, fire and wind. And it strikes me that the Hebrew scriptures were very aware of those two sources of evil. And of course, the harder one to deal with, actually, is the problem of natural evil. In a sense, we understand to a certain extent that human beings created, I believe, with free will, can do bad things, and we may come on to that later. Now, within Christianity, it's very interesting that Christ himself referred to these two sources in a famous story recorded by the historian Luke. And it goes like this. They were in Jerusalem at the Temple Mountain, and there were some present told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. For warning of the Holocaust, I fear. And Jesus responded, "Do you think these Galileans were worse sinners than all other Galileans because they suffered this way? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish." And then he refers to natural evil. Or those 18, he said, who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them. Do you think they were more guilty than all others living in Jerusalem? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish. Now, it seems to me that's virtually identical with the situation as described by Job, and what is very important in it. And my experience of this is arriving in New Zealand just a few days after the tsunami. And it was interesting watching the different worldviews responding to that. There were Christians who responded citing the Psalms, "We won't be moved even though the mountains fall into the sea." And then there were the pantheists saying, well, it's just karma, so there's no point in helping the victims. And some of them were actually saying, well, this is God's will. This is God stepping in. It's their fault. And what I find very important in this whole debate is that Job was exonerated by God, so that if you're a victim of this kind of stuff, and this is very important pastorally, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are suffering because of something you yourself did. And Jesus says exactly the same thing. And what I'd add to this that seems to me important is that there are not only two sources of suffering, there are two perspectives. It's one thing to be a surgeon or a medic coping with COVID. It's another thing suffering COVID. And so there's a huge pastoral dimension as well as an intellectual dimension to all these problems.